welcome to Chapter 1, Part 2. This is taken from Gardner's Art Through the Ages, A Concise Global History, and this is from Chapter 1, Prehistory and the First Civilizations, Part 2, Ancient Near East, and I'm Julia Schlosser. Alright, so the civilizations that will be covered in Part 2, we'll look at Sumer and Akkad, and the Sumerians. Their civilization ranged from 3500 to 2332 BCE, and they established the first city-states. They construct temples on lofty mud brick platforms, and they adopt the register format for narrative art, so for storytelling art. And then the Akkadians from 2332 to 2150 BCE produced the earliest known life-size hollow cast metal sculptures, and we'll show you pictures of those. The third civilization that we'll briefly cover is Babylonia, and this civilization lasted from 2150 to 1070 BCE, and Hammurabi was the greatest Babylonian king. He reigned from 1792 to 1750 BCE, and he sets up a stele recording his comprehensive laws. So this is a statue that has all of his laws written out on it. And then Assyria. The Assyrians, their civilization lasted from 900 to 612 BCE, and they construct fortified citadels guarded by lamassu, which are human-headed, eagle-winged bull sculptures, very beautiful, and they carve large-scale reliefs celebrating their prowess in warfare and hunting. All right, so the Ancient Near East, we're going to cover a big span of time from 3500 to about 330 BCE, and it's located in this fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, and some of their achievements are city-states and empires, agriculture, specialized labor and social hierarchies, a writing system, and complex religions. Their themes, we'll see offerings, we'll see pictures of the gods, we'll see warfare and hunting, and then portraits of their rulers. And the forms that the artwork and monuments take are, we'll see mud brick construction, natural and conceptual treatment of figures, registers of space, and hierarchy of scale. Right, and so here's a map of ancient Mesopotamia and Persia, and this is famously in between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So you can see Akkad and Babylon and Sumer, Uruk and Ur, and other Nineveh and other cities, other ancient Mesopotamia, other ancient cities in ancient Mesopotamia and Persia. You can see here on the globe, this is the chunk of space that we're looking at. All right, so ancient Mesopotamia and Persia. Mesopotamia, which is a Greek word meaning the land between the rivers, so this is between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, is the core of the region often called the Fertile Crescent, where humans first learned how to use the wheel, the plow, how to control floods, and how to construct irrigation canals. In the 4th millennium BCE, the inhabitants of ancient Sumer, so this is often referred to as the cradle of civilization, established the earliest complex urban societies called city-states. So this is ancient Sumer, and they were the first to have these complex city-states. The Sumerians also invented writing and were the first to use pictures to tell coherent stories, far surpassing all the other earlier artists' tentative efforts at pictorial narration. So if you remember from the Stone Age, they were sort of starting to tell stories, but now the Sumerians are going to tell very coherent stories that complex narratives. All right, the fundamental change in human society from the dangerous and uncertain life of the hunter and gatherer during the Stone Age to the more predictable and stable life of the farmer and herder first occurred in Mesopotamia, and this is the landmass that forms a huge, what they call fertile crescent. It gets all of the silt from these rivers, and so it's very good land for growing crops. And this is from the mountainous border between Turkey and Syria through Iraq to Iran's Zagros mountain range. There, in present-day southern Iraq, the world's first great civilization, so Sumer, arose in the valley between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And we're going to look at a series of civilizations that conquered each other. So as we move from civilization to civilization, it's usually because the new civilization conquered the old. All right, so let's start with Sumer. Ancient Sumer was not a unified nation. Rather, it comprised a dozen or so independent city-states under the protection of different Mesopotamian deities or gods. The Sumerian rulers were the gods' representatives on earth and the stewards of their earthly treasures. So this is how they thought about their rulers, as being God's representative on earth and there to take care of this earthly treasure that belonged to the gods. The rulers and priests directed all communal activities, including canal construction, crop collection, and food distribution. So all of this went through. We're used to that, food distribution going through different companies or maybe the government, but in ancient Sumer, it was all from the priests and the rulers. Because the Sumerians developed agriculture to such an extent that only a portion of the population had to produce food, some members of the community were free to specialize in other activities, including manufacturing, trade, and administration. Specialization of labor is the hallmark of the first complex urban societies. In the Sumerian city-states of the 4th millennium BCE, activities that once had been individually initiated became institutionalized for the first time. The community, whether ruled by a single person or a council chosen from among the leading families, assumed functions such as protection from enemy attack and the whims of nature, so storms or forest fires, things like that. The city-state was one of the many Sumerian inventions, a very important one. And the Sumerian artists were the first to use art to tell stories. All right, so we're looking at the White Temple from Uruk, and this is modern Warka, for modern-day Iraq, and this was built between or approximately between 3200 and 3000 BCE. So this is a Sumerian temple called the White Temple. And using only mud bricks, so they didn't have access to stone. The Sumerians erected temples on lofty platforms several centuries before the Egyptians built stone pyramids. And this temple was probably dedicated to Anu, which was the sky god. All right, so the White Temple from Uruk. The layout of Sumerian cities reflected the central role of the gods in daily life. The main temple to each state's chief god formed the city's nucleus, so the center. In fact, the temple complex was a kind of city within a city, where priests and scribes carried on official, administrative, and commercial business as well as oversaw all religious functions. So there was no separation of church and state like we might think about today. All of these commercial functions would have been carried out by these priests. The outstanding preserved example of an early Sumerian temple architecture is the 5,000-year-old White Temple at Uruk, a city with a population of about 40,000. That was home of the legendary Gilgamesh. Sumerian builders did not have access to stone quarries and instead formed mud bricks for the superstructures of their temples and other buildings. Mud brick is a durable building material, but unlike stone, it deteriorates with exposure to water. The Sumerians nonetheless erected towering works, such as the Uruk temple, several centuries before the Egyptians built their stone pyramids. This says a great deal about the Sumerians' desire to provide grandiose settings for the worship of their deities or gods. The Uruk temple, whose whitewashed walls suggested its modern nickname, so we call it the White Temple, but of course they probably didn't. It stands atop a platform that is 40 feet above street level. A stairway leads to the temple at the top. As in other Sumerian temples, the corners of the White Temple are oriented to the cardinal points of the compass, so north, south, east, and west. The building, probably dedicated to Anu, the sky god, is about 61 by 16 feet, so it's not huge. By design, Sumerian temples did not accommodate large throngs of worshippers, so not everybody went inside the temple like we might go into a church, only a select few, so these were the priests and probably the leading community members. And the White Temple had several chambers, and the central hall, or cella, was the divinity's room, so the room for the god, and housed a stepped altar. The Sumerians referred to their temples as waiting rooms. So this is a reflection of their belief that the deity would descend from the heavens to appear before the priests in the cella. It's unclear whether the Uruk temple had a roof, so we don't know. All right, so then we're moving on. We're still in the ancient Near East, and we're still in the Sumerian culture, Sumerian civilization, and we're looking at a ziggurat platform. So this is a monumental mud construction. If you think about this, it is not made from brick. It's made from mud bricks, not stone bricks. And this is 50 feet tall, and the ziggurat, the Ziggurat, is one of the largest in Mesopotamia. And it has 3 ramp-like stairways, which are restored, that originally ended at a gateway to a brick temple, and the brick temple, it's no longer there. And this is in modern-day Iraq, or in Ur, and it was constructed around 2100 BCE. All right, so the ziggurat. Eroded temples on mud brick platforms still dominate most of the ruined cities of Sumer. The best preserved is the ziggurat, and a ziggurat is a tiered Mesopotamian temple platform. That's the definition, at Ur, and this was the home of the biblical Abraham. Built about a millennium after Uruk's White Temple, so about 1,000 years, and much grander, the Ur Ziggurat is a solid mass of mud brick, 50 feet high, and it's faced with baked bricks laid in bitumen, so to kind of help them stick on. 3 restored ramp-like stairways of 100 steps, each converge on a tower-flanked gateway. And from there, another flight of steps, which has not been rebuilt, probably led up to the temple that was once on top of the ziggurat. The loftiness of the Sumerian temple platforms made a profound impression on the peoples of ancient Mesopotamia. So they would look up at these enormous temples and be very much in awe. The tallest at Babylon was about 270 feet high, and it was known to the Hebrews. This was the Tower of Babel. It became the centerpiece of a biblical tale about arrogance. And about humankind's desire to build a tower to heaven. This desire angered God, and the Lord caused the workers to speak different languages, which prevented them from communicating with each other and bringing construction of the ziggurat to a halt. All right, so we're moving on to the Warka Vase, and again, this is from the Ancient Near East. It's from the civilization of Sumer. It's a Sumerian artwork. And the vase, it's about 3 feet high, so it's quite tall, and it's made of alabaster, which is a white stone, which is fairly easy to carve. And this tells the story again in registers. So these are these bands, starting at the very bottom with water, and then plants and animals, and then all of the workers who are bringing all of this bounty to the goddess Inanna. And she is up in this top register. So again, the bands tell a story about bringing all of these offerings to the goddess Inanna. And again, this is where the fine spot for this, where this was found, is in modern day Iraq. It's from about 3200 to 3000 BCE. All right, so the Warka Vase from Uruk, which is modern day Warka, is the first great work of narrative or storytelling relief sculpture known. So this is the very first one that we know about. The dedication of a religious ceremony honoring the Sumerian goddess Inanna incorporates all of the pictorial conventions that would dominate narrative art for the next 2,000 years. In other words, all of the ways that we tell stories through pictures all started back in ancient Sumeria. So it's kind of amazing to think about that they developed these ways of telling stories that we've used over and over and over again. The artist divided the pictorial field into 3 bands, and these are called registers or friezes, and placed all the figures on a common ground line. So this is a real break with Stone Age art. In Stone Age art, when we saw those cave paintings, they just put the animals wherever, right? There was no thought of having like an actual landscape or a ground line. So all of the figures on in these different friezes are all standing on the same ground line. So this is another kind of very important way to organize your story, so you don't have people just floating around. They're all standing on the ground. And so again, you can see this vase. It's about 3 feet tall, so it's quite tall, and it has these different, but see here, you can see there's a ground line, and all of the animals are standing on the same ground. The plants are all planted in the same ground. The people are all standing on the same ground. So this was an important innovation. All right, so the lowest band shows crops above a wavy line, which represents water. And then there's a register with alternating ewes and rams, and so these would have been gifts to the goddess. And agriculture and animal husbandry were the staples of the Sumerian economy, but the produce and the female and male animals are also fertility symbols. They underscore that Inanna blessed Uruk's inhabitants with good crops and increased herds. And a procession of naked men moving in the opposite direction of the animals fills the band at the center of the vase. The men carried baskets and jars overflowing with the earth's abundance. So all of the harvest, they will present their bounty to the goddess as a votive offering. And that's a gift of gratitude to a deity, usually made in fulfillment of a vow. So somebody might say, if you bless us with really good wheat harvest this year, we'll give you, 12 baskets of wheat as a votive offering. And in the uppermost band of the Warka Vase is Inanna, and she is wearing a tall horned headdress. And so this is how we know that she's a goddess, right? She's wearing this tall horned headdress. And near the men is a pictograph for the Sumerian official that scholars ambiguously referred to as a priest king. So he's both a religious leader and a secular leader. And some art historians interpret the scene as a symbolic marriage between the priest king and the goddess, ensuring her continued goodwill and reaffirming the leader's exalted position in society. So you can see that if you were married to the goddess, you'd be in a pretty good position, right, to rule society. So some art historians think about this Warka Vase as this scene as a symbolic marriage between the priest king and the goddess. And the greater height of the priest king and Inanna, compared with the offering bearers, indicates their greater importance. And this is a convention called hierarchy of scale, which the Sumerians also pioneered. So if you look at a Sumerian picture, you want to look if you want to know who the most important person is, that's going to be the tallest person, right? And so that's the way that they indicated who was most important, and that's called hierarchy of scale. All right, and here it is. So again, you can see at the bottom here are all the plants. Well, the very bottom is the water, and then the plants that they were thankful for, and then the ewes and the rams, so the female and male sheep, and then all of the men who are carrying all of this bounty to Inanna. And then up in this register, we see Inanna, and well, we don't see her here, but she's wearing a horned crown, so we know she's the queen. And then she's we think that this means she's married, kind of a symbolic marriage to the priest king. All right, so now we're moving on to a second type of artwork, still from Sumeria, and this is from Eshnunna. So this is the modern Talismar, again in Iraq, still in Iraq, and this is from about 2700 BCE, and these are statuettes of worshippers. So these were found in a group. There were 12 of them, and they vary in height. And here you can see the man is about 2 feet tall, and the woman is almost 2 feet tall. He's a little bit taller, 2 feet 4 inches, and she's about 2 feet tall. And so these are worshippers, and they are these kind of small statuettes. The oversized eyes, so can you see how big their eyes are? And these symbolize the perpetual wakefulness. So these worshippers are there kind of, they were probably given by important or wealthy people, and they symbolize how they are perpetually awake and offering prayers to the deity, right? So they're constantly watching for the deity to appear, and they're constantly offering prayers, and they're holding tiny little kind of beakers or cups, and these are they had different libations, so drinks that they could use to honor the gods. So these little figures kind of stood in for whoever donated them their prayers. They're offering prayers to the deity. All right, so the Warka Vase provides priceless information about the rituals that took place in the Sumerian temples. So we can see pictures of these rituals that they carried out in the temples. Further insight into the Sumerian religion comes from a cache of gypsum statuettes. So these little statuettes inlaid with shell and then black limestone. And if we go back, we can see that this would have been the black limestone, and then the white would have been shell. So these are kind of inlaid into these stone statues. And they were found at the temple at Eshnunna, which is Talismar if you looked on a map today. And the two largest figures, like all the others, represent mortals. So it's sort of an important distinction here that these statues represent people. They don't represent the gods. They represent the people praying to the gods. And they hold these small beakers that the Sumerians used for libations. And so this is kind of like a ritual pouring of liquid in honor of the gods. And even today, we still do that, right? We might pour a drink for somebody who isn't able to be with us. And the men wear belts and fringed skirts. And most have beards and shoulder-length hair. And the women wear long robes with the right shoulder bare. All right, and so their heads are tilted upwards, looking up, right, for the deity to appear. They wait in the Sumerian waiting room for the divinity to appear, for the god to appear, or goddess. Most striking is a disproportionate relationship. So they have these giant, oversized eyes and then tiny little hands. And scholars have tried to come up with ways to explain why are their eyes so big. And because the purpose of the votive figures was to offer constant prayers to the gods on their donors' behalf, the wide, open-eyed stares most likely symbolize the eternal wakefulness necessary to fulfill their duty. So 24/7. They're there. They're waiting for the God to appear. They're offering prayers. They're looking up constantly for that God to appear. All right, so now we're moving on to a third artwork called the Standard of Ur. Agriculture, trade, and the spoils of war brought considerable wealth to some of the city-states of ancient Sumer. So these city-states became very wealthy. They were very rich. And nowhere is this clearer than in the so-called royal cemetery at Ur. Now, they don't know exactly who's buried there, whether it was an actual king or whether it was just important people in the community, but they call it the royal cemetery. And these contained amazing gold helmets and daggers with handles of lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli is this beautiful blue stone, which was imported from Afghanistan. They had gold beakers for those libation ceremonies, bowls, jewelry of gold and lapis, and musical instruments, chariots, which are these kind of wagons that horses or donkeys pull, and then other luxurious items. But one thing that they found there, it was not necessarily the most expensive item, but it's called the Standard of Ur. And it is kind of like a little box with sloping sides. And these are all inlaid with shell and lapis lazuli, that beautiful blue, and then red limestone. And it tells us a story. So this is a narrative. And art historians usually refer, so there's two long sides of this box, and they call one side the war side and the other side the peace side. And so on the war side, there's four donkey-drawn, four-wheeled war chariots, and these are crushing the enemies. You can see the bodies of the enemies appear on the ground in front of and beneath the animals. And then there are these foot soldiers, and they lead away the captured foes. And then in the uppermost register, the soldiers present bound captives. And the victors have stripped them naked to degrade them, and they show them to this king-like figure who's stepped out of his chariot. And again, the chariot is this little kind of wagon that's pulled, in this case, by donkeys. His central place in the composition and his greater stature, again, what do we call this? We call it hierarchy of scale. So he is so tall that his head actually breaks through the border at the top. And so we know that he is, so it's not just that he's a very tall person, right? It's not just like he's a really tall basketball player or something like that. He's actually bigger because he's the most important person in this composition. So that's how we know this. So it's not realistic. I mean, we don't really know if he was actually taller than everybody else, but in his picture on this side of this box, we know he's the most important because his head breaks through the border. All right, and so here it is. So this is the war side. And again, I mean, you can see these little blue pieces here. These are lapis lazuli, which is this beautiful blue stone. And then there's red limestone. These are the chariots that in this case, the donkeys are pulling. And then we have wood for the box, and then shell, which is probably making up the people. And so here you can see immediately, you can tell, oh, this guy is the most important. He's the ruler, because look at how his head actually breaks through the register. Again, remember, these are called registers, these bands that tell the story. And here we can see that the Sumerians are fighting their enemies. Their enemies are laying down on the ground. Here, the enemies are bound and stripped, and they're being taken up to the king. And then here, all of the soldiers of the king, right, are very orderly. And then here are the captives being taken. And so this whole side of this story the whole side of the box tells the story of this successful battle which the king won. And so this is why they call this the war side. You can see it kind of has these sloped little sides on the ends. They've got a few more little pictures. And then on the other side, we're going to take a look at the peace side. All right, so this is the peace side. And again, same materials, blue for the background, and then red, and then shell And here there's a harp player and a singer, and they are entertaining. So here's the harp player, and then the singer's over here singing. And again, you can tell who the king is because his head is breaking through the register. And then everybody down here is bringing all of this bounty. They're bringing animals and their crops, all showing the bounty to the king. So the artist represented all of the standing and seated humans in composite views. So again, remember the composite view is where part of the body is pointing one way and part of the body is pointing the other way. You can see that the head is in profile, but the front of the body is turned toward us. And so this is not really accurate because people's heads don't really swivel like that. But this is the way that they're choosing to depict. And then all the animals are in profile. So the animals are in profile and the people are in this kind of interesting composite view. Their bodies are facing forward and their heads are looking to the side. All right, so in the lowest band on the peace side, men carry provisions. Maybe this is war booty, things that they stole from the people that they vanquished on their backs. Above, the attendants are transporting animals, perhaps also spoils of war, and fish. And then there's this great banquet that's happening on the very top register. And all the seated dignitaries, and then a larger-than-life people, probably a king, and they all are attending a feast. So this is like a celebration. And then we have a harp player and a singer entertaining. All right, and so some art historians have interpreted the scene as a celebration after the victory in warfare represented on the other side of the box. But the two sides may be independent narratives, illustrating the two principal roles of the Sumerian ruler. So first, he's a mighty warrior who defends enemies of his city-state, and the chief administrator on the other side, who, with the blessing of the gods, assures the bountifulness of the land in peacetime. So you have to have somebody who's going out and fighting the war so that they're protecting everybody who lives in this city-state. And then the other thing you need is somebody who is making sure that the crops are being harvested and that everybody's getting fed. So the absence of an inscription. So there's no writing on here that tells us exactly what's going on. We don't know if this is a specific person or an event, but it's undoubtedly another early example of historical narrative storytelling, even if it's just kind of a generic kind of storytelling. It's definitely telling a specific story. All right, and so here it is again, the war side. We've got the registers, and each side is telling a different story. This is only about 8 inches long, yeah. All right, and so this is a burial good. This was found in a cemetery. It has a historical narrative on both, so on each side it tells a different story. When you hear the word narrative, that means a story. And it's talking about offering, so offering to the gods, offering to the king, and then this kind of rituals, and it's showing warfare, and then it's showing registers of space. And remember, each side has 3 of these registers, and hierarchy of scale. If you want to know who the most important person is, you see who the tallest person is. And in this early example of historical narrative, a Sumerian artist depicted a battlefield victory in 3 registers, and we go from bottom to top, and the size of the figure varies with their importance in society. All right, so the conclusion for Sumer. The civilization lasted from 3500 to 2332 BCE. The Sumerians established the first city-states. They construct temples on lofty mud brick platforms. They adopt the register format for narrative art. And we looked at the White Temple, the Ziggurat from Ur, the Warka Vase, the Eshnunna Statuettes, and the Standard of Ur with the war side and the peace side.